Okay, we're going.
Are we on? Okay. All right, class. So last week we were reviewing nouns and verbs and sentences, and we really sort of remembered everything that we learned in the second grade about how sentences were created and how sentences are constructed. And today we're going to be looking at, as we begin our narrative units, we're going to be collecting stories about ourselves. And we're going to look at how authors actually use verbs in their stories differently. And the verbs actually tell us a little bit about how the author is telling the story. So do you guys remember last week when we read The Relatives Came? Wasn't that a great story? Probably
Yes.
reminded you of times that you went on trips with your family. So I'm going to reread a little section of this to you today. And before I do, let's just kind of remember what is a verb again? What did we learn about verbs? What are they?
Actions.
Yeah, remember?
Actions.
Verbs are things you can do. Can you give me an example?
Eat.
Eat, yeah. See, you can actually make that motion that you're eating because it's something you can do. What's another verb you can think of? Skip, right? Show us, Reed. How do you skip, right? So one way that you can really be sure that the words is actually a verb, you can act it out, right? That's something that we practiced. So be using that skill today when you're looking for the verbs in the sentences. So our first task right now is to just find the verbs in the sentences. So I'm going to ask you guys to help me out. We're going to use the highlighters here. And I want us to notice the verbs in this excerpt from When the Relatives Came. And we're going to come up and highlight them. So let me just kind of reread it to you first. And you guys just kind of listen and pay attention to see if you can find the words that actually show like an action, like where the author is showing that the people are doing something. Okay? Okay. Thumbs up if you're ready. Awesome. Here we go. So finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their ice chests and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road. Then we crawled back into our beds that felt too big and too quiet. We fell asleep. Okay, just think about that for a minute. There were definitely some action words in there because we know sentences can't exist without nouns and verbs, right? So I'm going to ask you to turn and talk to your partner now. And I want you to just see if you and your partner can pick out some of the verbs in this piece. Go ahead.
Do you have one?
Yeah, I think the first, loaded, the relatives loaded, like they put something on top of or something like that.
Waved.
Waved.
Is headed a verb? Like a head? No?
Now think about that word for a minute. Headed. Put it with the words that are following it. Headed back to Virginia. What does that actually mean?
Are they going back?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so it is a verb.
Yeah.
Watched. We watched.
Crawl. Oh, that would be fun to do.
Crawl back into bed. Okay. Okay, class, come back to me. Are you ready to share some of the words that you found in this piece and maybe come up and highlight them that you think are verbs? Okay. You want to go first, Reed? Thanks.
First.
Loaded. How did you know that was a verb?
Because I could act it out.
Yeah.
I was picking. I could picture myself picking something up and putting
Great.
it somewhere.
Great. Good job.
Okay, I'll go. I learned that this is a verb because first I thought it was a head,
Uh-huh.
but then when I look at the other words around the word, it told me that they were going back somewhere. So I learned it's a verb.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. You just said going. So you could have almost put, and they were going back to Virginia in there, and you know the word go is a verb?
Yes.
Good idea. Good thinking. Because that is, head we know is a noun, right? but sometimes nouns can be used as verbs too. That's kind of confusing, huh? All right, let's see if we can find a couple more.
Couple means two, right?
Sure, can you get two this time?
Waved.
Waved, okay, we can see that.
And crawled. We thought that would be fun.
Yes.
Okay. Any others that you see? Watched? All right. Okay. Do you see any other verbs in there that
Oh,
show action?
I see one. I see
Okay.
one. Fell.
Oh, yeah.
Like I
Good
fell
job.
down.
You can actually do that, right? Mm-hmm. Nice job. Okay. Class.
Yes.
So now, we need to kind of look at these verbs and notice most of those verbs in this excerpt from the story have something in common. Can you just look at them for a second and see if you can figure out what is it that these verbs have in common? Turn and talk to your partner.
What does in common mean?
Similar, kind of the same.
So when I'm asking you to notice what they have in common, I'm really asking you to look actually at how they're spelled.
Oh,
Yeah, and then really pay attention to like part of the verb and then notice how some of them have a similar part. Okay? See if that helps you at all.
I think she means like the ending.
I do too. ED ending.
I think so.
Okay.
They have loaded is spelled with D-E-D at the end, and headed is spelled with D-E-D at the end, and waved doesn't have the D, but it has E-D, so does watched.
And crawl, but not fell.
Okay. Do you guys know anything about that particular ending? Like why an author would use that ending in his or her writing? Why would the author say loaded instead of load, or headed instead of head?
Relatives load up, head back.
Yeah, let's listen to what that sounds like. I like what you're doing there, Reed. Finally, after a long time, the relatives load up their ice chest and head back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. How does that sound different?
It sounds different now that you read it out loud to me. It makes it seem like it's happening at a different time,
Right.
like it's happening
Like
now.
already well, like that is like already happened.
Yes, nice job. So class, what we figured out is that when authors add an ED to a verb, they're actually trying to convey a story that already happened. Like something that happened a long time ago or yesterday. And that's how Cynthia Rylant was writing this story. So most of these verbs have an ED ending, right? We did find one that doesn't have an ED ending, and that's something we're going to talk about in the future when we talk about verbs, because that's a different kind of verb. But the verbs we're looking at today, over here, are called regular verbs, right? And the regular verb for loaded would be load, right? And then the past tense version would be what?
Loaded.
Loaded. Right? So the author just takes this regular verb and adds an ED to indicate something that happened long ago. And so it lets us know while we're reading when the story took place. So today, you're going to work with partners and you're going to look at some of the other mentor texts that we've been reading in class in our narrative unit. We read night driving, and we read about roller coasters, and each partner is going to get a book or two and a graphic organizer with past tense and present tense. And we're going to be looking for regular verbs that have ED endings. And we're going to be trying to figure out, is the author telling this story in the present, or is he or she telling it in the past? And how do we know that? How do the verbs help us figure that out? Okay? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So turn and tell your partner right now exactly what it is we're going to be doing with the books and the graphic organizer today, just so I'm sure that you know what we're up to, okay? Here you go. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to look through these books,
Yeah.
and we're going to find verbs, and And we're gonna find past tense verbs, and put them right here. And we're gonna find present tense verbs, put them right here.
And I think she also said that we have to look at the story happened in the past or in the present.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna read.
All right. So off you go, and we'll come together and share what we figured out. Okay,
Sounds good.
good job.
My dad and I are driving west.